Okay, first question for the panel. Please discuss the relationship between resilience and mental illness.
Anybody? Hand it to the doctor. Resilience requires strength and capacity, is what research shows. So they're two separate things, but we need to be building our strength, and then we need to be building that capacity so that when we take a hit and we experience trauma or loss or whatever type of adversity, we have something to kind of a buffer to fall back on, and that allows us to get up more quickly and to recover more quickly. And that is true mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And so mental illness is a component of that we need to be working and have a state of wellness in our mind operating. So the more resilient we are, it adds to our mental health. But mental illness is something that we continue to try to destigmatize. I was just thinking that yesterday because we, with Wounded Warrior, being one of our sponsors, and right away Jackie was so helpful on the team here and said, did I overhear, is there a Wounded Warrior going to come, or who we want to accommodate? We want to make sure that we have accommodations, and immediately it just flowed. And we do that with the physical. If someone came in on crutches or rolled in on a wheelchair, or we just kind of fall over ourselves to accommodate, especially someone who's done that in service to us appropriately. But we don't tend to look at mental illness the same way because it's hidden, it's invisible, and yet it is as real as a broken leg or a physical injury. And so that's, I think, a couple points I want to start by talking about with mental illness, and we need to really continue to keep it forefront, to talk about it, to destigmatize it. It is simply part of us being human. We're not sometimes we treat ourselves. Go ahead, and it needs to continue to be integrated and forefront. Yes.
Thanks, Molly. I want to jump on that for a second and talk about a couple of things. It has to do with the destigmatizing some things, but also I want to talk for a second about post-traumatic stress. And you notice that I didn't use the D word with it. And I have a lot of friends who have talked about this over time. And, all of us, when we experience trauma, we're going to respond to it in different ways. And sometimes we will respond in a very negative way to one instance, or it might be our 20th instance, and we can't necessarily predict it. But I think taking the stigma away, just by starting with not calling it a disorder, is an important step. It's post-traumatic stress. And, both mentally and physically, we're going to respond to these things. Let me go back to 2005. So on the 19th of May, 2005, I was on a rotation with the Iraqi Special Police Commandos. The only thing police about these guys was their name, by the way. It was a raid force. And I had in some ways a bad day, but in some ways a good day. So I got blown up twice in one day in two different vehicles. But it was a good day because none of us was hurt. Or at least that's what we thought. Quick flashlight on everybody in the middle of the night, no blood. Okay, we're good to go, keep going. And what I didn't understand is that a couple of my guys had what we now call traumatic brain injury. Back in those days, we called concussions. But again, typical infantryman perspective, hey, you don't have any blood on you, get back in the turret. And what I didn't understand until it was about a year later, the Army came out with this big thing focused on traumatic brain injury and understanding the physical aspects of a concussion. what happens when your body's exposed to that kind of blast. You see, there may not be any blood, but there's a very real physical injury to your brain. Because what happens is there's a lot of shock, and it happens when your brain is slammed against one side of the inside of your skull and then the other. And it causes trauma to your brain. Now, what I also didn't understand until, again, we thought we were being hooah, right? Get back in the turret. But what I didn't understand is that once you've been exposed that way, you're at tremendous risk for permanent brain damage if you're injured again. And it took the Army, in this case, chain teaching, mandating that every soldier got educated on this for us to overcome this idea of avoiding, a detailed look on traumatic brain injury. That didn't come about until, I think, 2006 or 7. Now, why do I say that? We're still working on the post-traumatic stress thing. We haven't figured it out yet. It starts, I think the most powerful way to influence other people is to lead by example, and it starts with the example from our top leadership all the way down. But even then, we're having a hard time overcoming this idea that we could have very real injuries even if you can't see them. And so it's what I ask all of you, because, I don't care if you're, a senior airman, you're all leaders. Lead by example. And when somebody's hurting, listen and act with compassion. And be careful of being judgmental. Just because somebody responds to an event differently than you do doesn't mean that they're not in real need for help, because we all respond differently. And you may respond one way 5 times in a row, but number 6 is a magic one.
And a couple quick stories. Resilience is also, we have to be looking at the needs, the demands, and the resources, and those fluctuate. And Jeff just talked about that day. His demands just exceeded resources in a way initially he wasn't even aware of. But when you have resources, perceived resources, that are requiring more than you think you have to give, the bigger that gap, the greater challenges we have with mental health. And so a chaplain that we work with in Michigan, and he heads up the Army National Guard, and he is very open about his experience, and he tries to talk to a lot of young service personnel, but you would consider a fairly stable guy. He considered himself stable. He had a lot of more demands growing. He went to a suicide prevention conference, and he was immersed in that for a few days. And he said he got to a really dark place, and he knew he was getting in trouble. He was having thoughts of taking his life, and he had a couple numbers programmed in his phone, and he said, I knew that if I said, show up at the airport, I'm flying home, I need you there, I knew they would show up. I know they wouldn't ask any questions. I know they'd get me the help I needed. They would take care of me. That goes back to the relationships. And then he went away for a month, and he got the help that he needed. And he talked about how that looked. So we're not saying that this happens to people who aren't smart or people who aren't highly accomplished or all of that. It's just, again, goes back to the human needs. And the other story I wanted to tell is in the early childhood adversity. We have a depth and a growing level of research around adverse childhood experiences. And there's assessments you can take based on, do you have abuse in your home? Was there neglect in your home? Was there alcohol and drug use or domestic violence or a parent incarcerated? Those type of things. And oftentimes, and we're trying to change this, people will get a score of 0 to 10 based on their childhood experiences. And initially when that work came out, we did 2 things. 1, people started to think of themselves as that score. And 2, they didn't look at resilience factors, so protective factors. And what the research is showing now is if you have a lot of protective factors, connection with trusted adults, some of the Thrive things that we talked about, you can withstand a lot of adversity because you also have more strength and resources. But when that research first came out, we were working in DC with Department of Human Services, and I met this woman, and she handed me her card, and underneath her name, it said ACEs score of 10, meaning out of all the bad things that we've identified that can happen as a child, I had all 10. And that's how she self-identified, not only to herself, but to the world. And that goes back to what we were talking about this morning with story. We have that opportunity to all write a book of our life. And what is that book going to look like? And if this woman had written a book that day, the cover would say ACEs score of 10. And we can rewrite that. And then we can choose and do the work, and then it becomes the title of a chapter, perhaps, or 2 paragraphs, or maybe 2 sentences. That's an ongoing process, and we write that story in relationship with each other and with conversations we're having today. And so I think that's an important context around mental illness, and to move beyond the labeling and the limiting and self-defining simply by that. I mean, we know statistically you do not need to look far to your left or to your right with the level of suicide ideation. Even in our high schools at this level, we have 22 to 25% of our kids every day who walk down the halls of our U.S. schools considering taking their life. So we have very elevated levels. That's our norm. And so while we continue to do the work to be decreasing that, Nadine Burke-Harris, another, she works with kids, but a great analogy. She said, if we have a well, and we have 10 kids going to the well, and they're drinking the water, and 9 out of the 10 kids have diarrhea, I can sit around all day long and write scripts for diarrhea, or I can think about going and treating that well. And that's the analogy we use. We have diarrhea work, and we're immersed in it every day, and we need to, and that work matters, but we have to continue to be thinking about treating the well. And that's where we are right now with military and mental health. And we have a lot of questions, and we're getting better about being vulnerable and living out those questions and having the type of conversations we're having today. And this work matters. What do you want to add?
I'm good.
I'm a lawyer. I'm not a psychologist, and I'm a child support attorney in Texas. I deal with a lot of people who are going through a lot of stressful situations because when they go to court, they're stressed out about their money, their children, and their broken relationships. But one thing that is common to all of us is that we all deal with depression. We all have struggles in our life. And probably at some level, most people have some form of mental health issues. But resilience is what kind of puts you, it makes you able to deal with whatever struggle that's going on in your life. What the evidence shows is that it's really not the strongest person that you see or the smartest person that you see who's going to be able to overcome the trauma and the struggles and the difficulties. It's the people who have developed those thrive elements that Dr. Molly talked about. The number one thing that you can do to help yourself, to help someone else, is to have that trusted person in your life that you can talk to. That one thing can help you get over a plethora of problems that are going in your life, the struggles, just connecting with that one person. And so that's something that all of us can do. Just in your day-to-day lives, you can look and you see someone who's struggling, who's having a difficult time. Just reach out to that person, be kind, ask about how they're doing, and that could be the one thing that could just save someone from taking their life by suicide, falling to pieces, not being able to recover over a difficult situation. So one important takeaway, just have at least a person that you can talk to help you deal with the struggles that are going on in your life. And I think that conquers a lot of the mental pressures that are going on in people's lives.
So we have lots of questions from the audience, and as they come in, we'll be reading them in order. So the next one for the panel is, in addition to the recent resiliency pause, what do you think that the military service components can do to reduce suicide occurrences? Oh, Lord, okay. I am not the expert here, but
something wonderful that is happening within the military. I'm from Military City, USA, San Antonio, Texas, and General Buchanan was at the Fort Sam base, and what they did, they opened up a resiliency center called the Vogel Resiliency Center. I think it is the first resiliency center with the military. At the Vogel Resiliency Center, it's a one-stop location where service members and their families, they can go in there, they can get help. They have training on nutrition, they do yoga, they have financial counseling. They try to deal with the whole person, because a lot of times in the military, I think you go into the service and you're trained to kind of separate your mind from your body, get the mission done, get the job done. And with resilience, we're trying to bring that whole person back together again to make sure that you're engaging in self-care and doing whatever feeds your soul, makes you happy, helps you calm down and regulate your body so you can deal with whatever's going on in your personal life story. So.
Thanks, April. I'll just to add to it, what makes that place a little different is it's not just a place where all these different services are under the same roof, but actually they work as a team. So if I come in, if I want to quit smoking or limit my drinking or lose some weight or whatever, I can see help. I can go get my body fat measured at the bod pod and everything. But in the meantime, the whole team works and looks at nutrition. How do I cook in a more healthy way? Maybe I need help with financial counseling. Maybe I need to see the chaplain or whatever. And so that's how it ties together. Part of the question at least dealt with suicide. Let me
Hear the question again, sir?
No, it's okay. I sort of remember. I just want to make one comment, and that is this has to do with reaching out and helping other people. I think that when something bad happens, especially if something bad happens to somebody else, maybe your best friend is raped. Okay? Sometimes our natural response is to avoid that person or avoid talking to them. And we're going to hear this afternoon from Paula Stevens, who lost her son, and I know she's going to talk at least a little bit about somebody who had been a friend who doesn't talk to you. Why are they doing that? It's because they're uncomfortable. They don't know what to say. So if you have a friend that's had a traumatic event, or somebody you think might be, having some hard times with depression, one of the worst things you can do is avoid it. You may not have anything to say, but just being there counts. Just go put your arm around your buddy and say, hey, look, I don't know what to tell you. I haven't experienced what you've experienced. I don't know what it's like to be raped. I don't know what it's like to lose my mom. But I'm here for you. That matters a lot. And that's how you can help each other, is just be there for each other.
And we talked about the traumatic brain injuries, but the impacts of trauma are real, how they impact our brains. And they can cause our left and right brain not to talk to each other as well. Or they can train our mind and body to be disconnected. And so those are as real as physical injuries, those implications. But there's help available. So I just want to say there's always hope, there's always help. There's, just as you are so dedicated to serving our country, you are surrounded by people who are dedicating their lives from research to practice to everything they do. They get up in the morning and they are here to help. And so just always know that you're not alone and there's always help.
I mean, the best answer is to take a day off and read PowerPoints, right? Isn't that what we do? We stop everything and we read a PowerPoint slide. No, I'm not a fan. I honestly, from having lived it and sat in the seats where you guys are sitting in, an idea I've not heard discussed, I would love to hear discussed, is a paid sabbatical. I think after soldiers, airmen, Marines, have done their time for a certain while, they need a time to step away and go learn a different craft. Go to the beach, go basket weaving, go do something where you're not this. Maybe do it in pairs, maybe do it by rank. I don't know, but I would love to see. I know another. I've been around some of the foreign armies. Some of them highly support. Some of their senior. They're great about their senior. I only know the Army. I'll be honest with you. Where the Army's great is when you make major, they send you to get your master's degree. When you make this, they send you there. As an E8 who went through 9 combat tours, they never gave me a chance to get a master's degree. I never had a chance to go back to a real school and separate myself from combat. So I would love to see some form of like a paid sabbatical, something where that lowest ranking person can step away, go to a real place, not the bus ticket they can afford, and make it somewhat structured, but give them a place to actually learn something else and step away from what they do.
Okay, question for Kirk. With all your time away from your wife and children, how did you stay connected with them, or what did your family do to stay connected with you? How did you strengthen those relationships?
Again, I actually consider myself lucky in that we were the pre-internet type family. My wife was very conditioned because I started deploying, as I showed you, in '96. I would go away for 30 days, and it would be a lucky day if once a month to 2 weeks I might make it back to the embassy and make a cell phone call, because we didn't even have cell phones. So you might get back. That I found to be healthier than constant contact. And I know that's not what people want to hear. But when I saw the younger guys in my same situations sitting on the iPad every single night in Iraq, and then the one night they had to go out and do something, or the one night they went late, and now the wife is worried, and now she's wondering, why aren't you there? I saw so much more stress in their situations than I saw in mine. So having and building those kind of trust bonds and we also, I think a very big key to ours was having our own lives. My wife was a teacher. She was busy raising 2 boys, and she could care less what I did for a living, and I loved it. She didn't know what my rank was. If you asked her to use the acronym that they told her to use to tell people what I didn't do, she couldn't even tell you. She said, my husband's in the Army, and I'm a teacher. And I highly support that. Not that she didn't support me. Obviously, she let me do, what I wanted, but she was not eaten up. She didn't wear my rank. She didn't go to the become a part of the functions. So when we talked, it was, we talk once a week on kind of a scheduled as could, and it would be like, what's going on with you? I'd always say, nothing here. I'm working out. I'm working on my tan. Hope I look good when I come home. And then what are you and the boys doing? And we did not dwell on it. Was not a factor. It was not those kind of things. So it didn't become the crux of what we talked about. She had her own thing, and I would rather hear about that. I don't want to tell her what was happening on my end. That's all I can relate to personally. That was what worked for us.
Next question. What have you seen in other communities as best practices to ensure members of the community know what resources are available? Is it digital? Is it having a central location that people feel safe going to for information? Is it more marketing or certain kind of marketing?
Yes, 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 and yes. We just finished a 6-month, we call it a resilience first aid pilot, but a lot of that was focused on how do we get a community to come together to work together and understand what everybody's doing and what are those resources. And at the end of the 6 months, a lot of progress was made. We had facilitation, we had educational sessions every other month, which ranged from understanding the impacts of trauma and building resilience to post-crisis response and recovery to leadership and cultures of organization. So we did a lot of that education, but we did a lot of conversation, got the right people in the room, and so that has, and then we hit the 6-month end of the pilot and nobody was ready to be done with the work, so it's continuing that way. But one outcome also was to know where we wanted the resources housed virtually, and for everyone to continue to submit resources. The attitude that you bring to that type of work is essential. The openness, the true collaboration. You'll hear from David Richmond today, and he'll say not collaborate meaning you do what I want you to do. That's how I define collaboration, but that true open-hearted collaboration. And we had organizations that at the beginning of that work considered themselves competing organizations, and members of those organizations created really extraordinary and helpful and effective and productive bonds and started leading up and down and across. And so that work continues. So all of those options you gave, whoever, that was a very wise question, because you identified some great forward-moving steps. All of those things we need to do because everybody has a different starting place or a different way to access resources. Remember what I mentioned earlier, that those resources have to be relevant to us or we're not going to go look for them and we're not going to use them. So we need a multidisciplinary approach.
For Dr. Marty, can you elaborate on your statement that you cannot lead someone past your own point of healing and how this impacts empathy towards others? Empathy, yes.
Yeah, so you can't give away what you don't have goes to the self-care. You can't lead someone past your own point of healing, goes to that self-awareness piece. Just even Jackie came and brought us over from the hotel this morning, and she was talking, I said, I think we're going to push a little bit in different areas, especially in kind of the tougher cultures and military, because oftentimes we want to think that if we're going to perform at our best, and there's no place that matters more performance than military. If we're going to perform at the best, some of the things that we say, even though they're research backed, it might feel soft. And she said, we need to be vulnerable to have that level of excellence, that courage, and that is the path through. And so that process of not being able to lead someone past your own point of healing is that shift from saying, I'm leading because I'm in charge, I know the answers, I'm going to lock it down and lead from this place. And really experiencing and going deep within and being guided to really understand. It's called private logic, but basically you have a lot of programming in your brain that is telling you how you operate, how our world should operate, how the military should operate, what a good soldier does or doesn't do, what a good man or woman does or doesn't do, all of this programming. And we need to be taking a look at that and shining a light on that, or it's going to limit our ability to lead ourselves and certainly lead other people. I mean, if we're not working on healing our own wounds and our own narratives, we're going to be very limited in trying to lead someone else toward their own healing and their wholeness.
Why do you think we are seeing an increase in suicide this year within the Department of Defense, despite the fact that fewer people are seeing combat or other traumatic events? How do we get in front of this?
One thing that's lost is, we pull from the society that we come from. This is the one thing I used to laugh at my own, because they would be like, oh, this generation that, or, these new guys this and that, and I'd stop them and I'd say, you guys realize that this morning when the sun came up, there was a 19-year-old in Afghanistan who started his patrol. And that's this generation that's too soft, that, can't do what we did. Yeah, you can, and you're doing it. But again, we don't grow commandos in fields out in the middle of nowhere. I came from Dallas. The guy next to me came from Kentucky. The guy, I had a British guy, who came all the way over through L.A. and now he's running through buildings with me, as an American soldier. We come from all walks. We bring all those things with us, and we're pretty much right now reflecting the numbers of our society. We're seeing a very high spike in suicides within our own world, every world around us. So. I get a little, like I say, I think people get a little caught up in numbers sometimes. A lot of times we really are reflecting the number. Are they acceptable? No. It's not to say this is what we are and this is where we're going to settle at and this is what we do. But don't get so caught up in these numbers that we lose sight of that we're reflecting the society that we're drawing from. With that, we have to look as a whole. We have to start looking at things as this isn't a soldier problem. This is a human problem that's been brought into our airmen, our soldiers. So look at it holistically and don't treat it as this, what are we doing so bad in the military that we're 1% higher.
I know we're out of time, but I'm compelled to say something. I had a friend, guy whose name was Steve Salazar, and he was in charge of one of our training centers in Europe. And this was right kind of on the tail end of that dark period in Iraq, sort of at the partway through the surge, but before things had turned around. And the particular outfit he was in charge of, they were having a rash of suicides. And when you looked at the dynamic of who was, I like to say, died by suicide rather than committing suicide, I know a whole different discussion there, but who was dying were the youngest troops. That was where the biggest number was. And of course, this was 2007, and we're, just starting to surge. We're on this treadmill back and forth to Iraq and Afghanistan. Everybody's either coming and going. At the Army, in its infinite wisdom at the time, was at 15-month rotations. You'd do a 15-month combat rotation and come back and have 12 months off, and then another, it was just constant. And so our thought, all these youngsters were killing themselves, first-term enlistees, E1 to E4, our youngest troops, and our thought was, okay, they're overcome by the stresses in combat. They're dealing with lots of combat, financial problems, relationship problems, all of this. Well, when they peeled the skin off the onion and took a detailed look at it, that was not the case. Yes, that was a population that was killing themselves, but they did not have multiple tours in combat. They were not experiencing the financial problems or these kinds of things. However, their sergeants were. And what we learned is that the first line supervisors were having all of these stresses, but first of all, they were really good at hiding them. And the second thing is their cups were really full. And because their cups were full, they had no time to help their privates because they were dealing with all their own issues. And so Steve and his team put together this multidisciplinary approach, and they just focused on trying to help the sergeants, the staff sergeants, tech sergeants, master sergeant rank, that E5 to E7 rank, focus on taking care of themselves and becoming better leaders. And in so doing, they could better take care of their subordinates. But at least in that case, we had a problem with the first line supervisors that was being expressed in their subordinates.
Nourished leaders create resilient troops. Yeah. And we are out of time, I believe.
Are we out of time? Yes, we're out of time. So with all the other questions, we'll gather them up and provide answers and send them out to everyone at a later time. So thank you for the questions.